Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Collier. I'm the executive director of Renew Theaters, which manages the Princeton Garden Theater in Princeton, New Jersey, as well as the Ambler Theater, County Theater, and Highway Theater in Pennsylvania. I'm really excited to have this Q&A tonight and that you all joined us on this night before Thanksgiving to discuss this really incredible film. I'm thrilled to have the directors of the film, Lydia Pilcher and Ginny Mohler, here with me, and to have the opportunity to really talk about this film, which is a really local film. It's a story that is really close to us here in New Jersey, and I think there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm very excited to introduce our two directors and want to have the chat feed. And if you do have a question or comment to share in the chat feed, and we will make sure that that gets passed on. First off, the question is to Ginny. Tell me how you first connected with this story. I had not heard of the Radium Girls, and that's kind of crazy, knowing that it's such a local story. It seems so impactful. How did you first find this story?
I also had not heard the story, and when I learned about it, was blown away. I was working as an archival researcher back in 2012 on a documentary about the atomic bomb. And in my research, I stumbled across this very obscure reference to the Radium Girls, and all it said was we all remembered the tragic dial painters of World War I. And I Googled it and found myself on a Wikipedia page about the New Jersey Radium Girls, and couldn't believe I hadn't heard the story, couldn't believe it wasn't a movie. And that's when my writing partner, Brittany Shaw, and I began developing the screenplay.
That's great. And Lydia, how did you get involved with the story?
Sure. So I have been a producer for a lot of years, and I have also been an environmental activist for a lot of years. And I wanted to find a project that would blend my passions, particularly a narrative storytelling project, because that's my area. And I was looking for a screenplay, and a friend told me that Ginny and Brittany had written the story about the Radium Girls, and it is a story that we haven't heard that much about in our history books. And so I looked it up. I called Ginny. I asked them to send me the screenplay, and I just loved it. It was the idea that the story was being told through the eyes of teenage girls. That they had these big dreams of one wanted to go to Hollywood, the other one wanted to go on archaeological digs in Egypt. And they were painting in this factory in New Jersey, radium watch dials, and they were lip pointing the brushes, which were, full of radium paint, and they were slowly being poisoned. And it really is a story of a coming of age story. They were innocent in the beginning, young girls, big dreams, and then this whole unfolding of a scandal happens. And it's an amazing story. And I was excited to come on board with Ginny and Brittany and really develop it together.
Thank you. Ginny, can you speak a little bit more about the process of writing the script and what you went through with Brittany? I did a little Wikipedia digging and was able to look up some of the story, but as you were putting this together, were there actual accounts that you were basing this on? Are the characters real, amalgams, completely fabricated? Can you talk about how you made history come to life?
Yeah, it was such a challenging process, especially, we were in the documentary world at the time, and finding, there's so much material to draw from. So there are diaries. One of the Radium Girls of New Jersey, Catherine Schaub, left behind diary entries. There are court records, the Library of Congress. There's so much research that does exist. And so when we thought about how we wanted to construct this screenplay, some of the characters are one-to-one. It's sort of exact who the people were. A lot of them are the doctors and the real life villains, you might say. And then when it came to the Radium Girls,
also some of the other people like Catherine Wiley of the Consumers League, and So there's the sort of the people on both sides that are
but really, the girls who are the heart of the film are composites of different Radium girls, even from different cities. Our main character Bessie is vivacious and dreamy and doesn't lick the paintbrush because she doesn't like the taste. And Catherine Schaub has that vivaciousness in her diary entries. There's a but there's a Radium girl from Illinois who was interviewed much later. She survived for a long time, who didn't lick the brush because she didn't like the taste. Her name is Marie Rossiter, and so she was an inspiration for that part of Bessie.
And some of the facts that are mixed in there with the Egyptology and the Book of the Dead and things like that, were those also from the Radium Girls, or were those screenwriter freedoms?
Those were 1920s pop culture screenwriter imaginings, I would say. Brittany and I were so excited about this idea of what it would be like to be a teenager in this time, and really drawn to the dramatic question of what would it be like to be a teenager and then to be faced with this and have your world turned upside down. And so Brittany in particular was really drawn to the Egyptology craze that was happening in the 1920s with the discovery of King Tut's tomb, and that naturally affixed itself to Josephine. Well, and really, you know, Josephine has one fascination with the Egyptology, which is archaeology and very sort of literal digs, and then Bessie has a sort of poetic fascination with the mythology of it.
But I think, just adding on to what Ginny is saying, and also because Ginny and Brittany were archival researchers, they were already immersed in the history of this period. And, you know, Brittany had been working on a civil rights documentary, so she knew that the Tulsa race riots had happened 6 years before the Radium Girl story. And there were a lot of other things that, you know, appear in what we call the world building of the contextual world that the Radium Girls existed in, like the Sacco and Vanzetti, and you know, even references to things like Mount Rushmore being carved into the mountain of the Black Hills, and all of those things are part of the setting that the story happened in. And ultimately, you know, and this is the real part of the story and the real connection to the Radium Girls, is that it was set in this early political women's movement where women had just gotten the right to vote not that long before and really wanted to use the vote. And industrialization was like the Wild West. And there were a lot of activist women. There were a lot of female scientists and physicians like Alice Hamilton, who had sort of cut her teeth in, you know, in the world of Jane Addams and Hull House, and had started touring factories and plants and really seeing that there were like real issues with lack of regulation around toxic chemicals and worker safety. And these were the women that were kind of in the wings, you know, when the Radium Girls case came to light. And I always like to say that I think New Jersey is actually a real hero in the story, because there were radium factories all over the country. We've become aware of even more than we knew about when we were filming. But in New Jersey, there was a woman working at the public health department, and she started seeing all these reports of sick workers coming across her desk, and it didn't feel right to her. And so she said they couldn't all have syphilis, and they're all working at the same place. And so she, you know, took this report to Catherine Wiley, who's played by Kara Seymour in the film, and she was the New Jersey Consumers League director. And Catherine Wiley, when it looked like the Radium Girls were actually going to stand up and really come forward. I mean, she was the one who really got behind them and said, there are so many women out there who are going to, you know, take up your cause. And she, you know, was the one who really helped them find the lawyer and all of these things that sort of built toward the notorious case of the Radium Girls.
We did have a question that just came through talking about the creation of the story, asking was the author of the book involved in the making of the movie? And I guess there are other books on this topic. I don't know if there was a particular book that was referenced. Can you speak to that?
There's a book called Radium Girls that came out just after we were finishing post-production. So it was I think it's something where the Radium Girls are finally getting the recognition that is so important and so deserved, whereas these, I think, our projects were on a parallel path. So no, so the film is not based on the book or connected to the book. There's an earlier book as well from the 90s called Radium Girls, and that includes a really amazing overview of the industrial toxicology landscape of the time, but that also wasn't a direct basis. Our film is really based on the events.
I want to tie back to one thing that Lydia mentioned, which was all of the cultural references, Mount Rushmore, Sappho and Vanzetti, and things like that appear. I absolutely love the use of the archival footage and how that really set the tone for where we were, and it made this a fairly intimate costume drama, actually really connect to the history and the time and everything that was going on. It was very interconnected. It also made me think, and I think it was while I was seeing the Méliès section, when they're at the party, of another Central Jersey figure whose films would have been popular at that time. So I need to know, number one, tell me about the idea to include the archival footage, and if there was conscious play to playing with Thomas Edison and sort of what was going on in the oranges in that era and that time period and that place.
Well, I think we were always, planning to be a smaller independent film. And, the Sloan Foundation had given Ginny and Brittany a grant for their screenplay. And we wanted to make the movie, and we wanted to, make it as an independent film. So the real challenge, in creating a period film is how do you create that feeling of the world and the scope of the movie if you don't have a lot of money to build expensive sets and all the things that you have to do to create every detail that's on camera. And there was a character already in the script who was Etta, and I think part of her story was that she came from Tulsa, and the race riots had happened some years before, and then it became sort of an ideal. We felt like, well, if there could be a camera person in the story who was filming and might actually be creating some of this archival footage that we see on screen. And then we had the idea, or Ginny and Brittany had the idea, to make Etta a camera woman from Tulsa whose family owned a photography studio. And after the massacre, she moved to the East Coast and was politically involved. And that's how her path crosses with Bessie. But you get a sense of the dichotomy between the two characters when they first meet, and Bessie's, going on about, Rudolph Valentino, and Etta is saying, well, I shoot real life, and the real life is what, we see from her character point of view and the lens of her camera. We used a 16 millimeter Bolex and shot some black and white footage of some characters that were in the film who we might imagine to be placed in some of these demonstrations and protests or press events. And then we used that so that it felt a little bit more seamless going back and forth between the black and white archival and our colorful world, to try to make it feel a little bit more like a singular world.
And I'll just add the Thomas Edison connection. That's amazing. I didn't think of that. I mean, I think that's such an important part of early cinema, and the trip to the moon, and that reference again is tying to that. And so I think I actually love that there's an even deeper New Jersey connection than I had realized. It's a great question.
I'm glad to hear that is complete happenstance. But it's fun. It makes it even deeper and a fun Easter egg there, I guess.
Yeah.
One of the other things that was mentioned earlier in what you were saying is, this story is from a teenager's perspective. And, we have a number of different teenage women who are portrayed in the film, and they really carry the whole film. Can you speak about the casting process and if it was a challenge to find, the right people to fit the characters that you had written?
Well, I think one of the things from the very beginning of the, from even conceiving of Bessie and Joe before we wrote a single line for them is the dynamic of their relationship is the heart of the film. They have a lot that they disagree on or don't completely connect on, and yet when Joe is in this situation, Bessie's whole life changes and she changes. And so the chemistry between them was always something that we knew we would really have to nail in casting. And I think that with Joey King as Bessie and Abby Quinn as Josephine, I think that chemistry was there, and that was so important. And maybe Lydia can say more about that.
Yeah, I think, well, that was obviously the place where we had to start because they're the stars of the movie. And I think Joey felt like that voice that was in Catherine Schaub's diaries, where she really, Catherine, you could that's an amazing thing to be able to pick up original source material from one of the Radium Girls diaries and really see that actually she was a dreamer and that she did have a vivid imagination. And, Joey seemed like the perfect person to do it. So we were thrilled when she read the screenplay and really wanted to take on that role. And Abby is somebody that I had worked with on another smaller film I had done a few years earlier. She was still in high school on that film. So it was exciting to be able to bring her into this movie, as being a little bit older and just knowing already, how terrific she was as an actress. She has that kind of presence that, you see her on screen and you just kind of lean forward because she's so authentic and so soulful. And then the rest of the cast, we had a lot of New York theater actors, which is the great thing about, doing movies out of New York, because you get, just terrific actors from Broadway and the stage. And so a lot of those actors, even Colby Minifie, who plays Doris and has been acting since she was 11 on stage in New York. And, Vianne Cox, who plays Dr. Drinker, and Greg Hildreth, who was the star in Frozen, and, many, many more. So we had a really great pool of talent to pull from.
It was a wonderful cast, and everyone really complimented each other, and you really did feel the relationship between the two sisters. So congrats on the casting there. Just a reminder to anyone that if you do have questions or comments, to use the chat feature here in YouTube, share them, and those will be passed on. So we'd love to hear what questions anyone out there watching has. Please make sure to share those with us. While we're waiting for people to post, I guess one other question about the screenwriting and sort of shaping a film. Now, I know historically, the film is as close to historically accurate in terms of, it's as best as I could tell with how the court case ended. Were you tempted to change the ending, to give the girls a happy ending in any way, shape, or form, or to play with that in any way?
I think that would contradict the whole point of telling the story, which I think, I'll just say this from my position, because I mentioned my environmental passion in the beginning. I think what the value is that history gives us is the ability to go back and look at stories and sort of see that, well, first of all, you can't deny a story that actually happened, and we're living in a time when there seems to be a lot of denial about things that we can't see, things that, relate to science. And I think when you can tell a story like this, you can kind of, and it's true, there's a lot of credibility to the ideas that are there. And we, I think Ginny and I talked a lot about in the beginning how, there were things like the water in Flint. There were different things that were happening with the environment that we thought, oh, this actually, and even in our early workshopping, people were saying, oh, this really makes me want to ask questions about more things that are just, I think, might be worth questioning. And that for us, that was a tremendous result if somebody felt that way after they had even just heard a script read through. But we didn't plan to release the film at this time. We were originally supposed to release the film in April, and the trailers were playing in theaters all over the country, and Cuomo shut the movie theaters down in New York. It was like the week before we would have opened. So we shuttered too. And we went into this whole moment of uncertainty. And then we really felt, by sort of toward the end of the summer, that we didn't want to wait too much longer to get the film out there. And everybody had started watching movies in this virtual cinema mode, which was really interesting. And we were very interested in that in terms of partnering with affinity groups, because we had so many themes in the movie between environmental justice and women's history and science and worker safety. And so we decided to go ahead and release when we'd been sort of out there since the very end of October. And the journalists have all picked up on the relevance to our story as per COVID, because, all of those things about something that you don't know everything about, something that is causing people to deny science, causing governments to turn away, causing workers to get sick, people are dying. Is it safe to go back to work? There were these themes that were so relevant that became a big part of the conversation as we came out of the gate. And it was interesting because it was really coming from the media and from journalists. Most people had never heard this story before. So that was the first shocker. How could we not have heard this story before? And then, oh my God, how does it relate to today? And we had heard from some people within the EPA when we finished the movie and we premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival that the EPA still used the Radium Girls case today in their toxic chemical litigation cases. And we were it's like, wow, it's such an old case, really? There's not. And then I think we slowly began to realize that it's because there was a proliferation of more factories out there than even we realized. Other big ones were in Ottawa, Illinois, or Waterbury, Connecticut. But we were on a Q&A last week with the Boston group, and there's a watch factory in Waltham, Massachusetts that is abandoned and is still contaminated, and they don't know what to do about it. It's just, radiate. If you watch the movie, that it'll go on for 1,000 years. So that's why it's still relevant, because the contamination is very, very difficult to contain. And even when the factories were shut down, the waste was used for landfill and poured into concrete, and that concrete was poured into sidewalks and housing foundations. And I think people who live in Glen Ridge and Montclair are probably aware of the fact that it's been a Superfund site with the EPA for a number of years, trying to contain this radium waste. I know that always just grinds the conversation to a halt.
Well, I also wanted to say that I didn't think it should have. I didn't think it should have a happy ending. I'm always very happy when independent films are able to hew to the way that things should be. I in watching a story like this, there's always that sense when I'm watching it, a dread that it's going to go the Hollywood direction and it's going to veer into that, like, we have to send people away happy. So I'm very glad that this stuck to the facts. And throughout watching the film, it's actually really startling how relevant it is. And I
But
think it's actually disturbing how relevant it actually can be for any period that anyone watches it, because these issues of corporate greed and environmental abuse proliferate our history, and it's I think this is a story you could drop in at any point and find some connection to.
Yeah, and I think for us, the thing that can lift you and hopefully does lift you up about the movie is that we really wanted to highlight this role that women played by, bringing all their voices together. So, you know, and we were very, when we got into sort of drilling into the drinker report when we were developing the script and trying to sort of figure out, what did go on in that whole story with this research report that American Radium commissioned, and it proved that radium was poisoning, and they had it changed in the New Jersey Health Department. And these women, these Harvard professors, scientists, discovered that this had happened. And Alice Hamilton, who is sort of one of the preeminent, pioneers in industrial toxicology and occupational safety, was the first female professor at Harvard. And she knew the drinkers who were working in the Harvard Department of Public Health. And that was like such a big deal, to find, to that letter that Alice Hamilton wrote to her colleague, Catherine Drinker, to say, did you know that they falsified your report? Did you know that? I mean, are you really going to let that stand? It's an amazing pivot, and it's an amazing pivot in terms of how that happens between these women who were sort of experts in their field. I guess my thing is that at the end of the day, if the film can make you question things that you feel like you're a little suspicious about or whatever, then the next level would be if it makes that in terms of inspiration.
Yeah, and I think just, going off of that and off of the question of, was there the impulse, for the happy ending? I think that's what we see Bessie go through. She is raging in the scene in the settlement and saying, this is not how this story will end. And they say, yeah, it is. And that's when, in that moment, it's really the choice between doing what her sister needs and growing in that way. And I think that moment that you have where, the Catherine Wiley and these women who have been shepherding this fight, and they have this moment, and Bessie says, so this is how it ends. And Wiley says to her, it never ends. And I will just say, sort of, fun fact is that The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot is one of my favorite poems, and it ends, it has this very powerful ending of so this is how the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. And I think Bessie is someone who was ready to fight, and so I think watching her navigate their ending is a really, hopefully, a blueprint, and beautiful blueprint for us in terms of the way that she continues to fight, but in not this battle, but in future ones, that she's not done
In the multiverse.
I
love the lines at the end when Josephine is sort of talking, rhetorically to Bessie and saying, I wish you could see yourself the way I see you, and she talks about her as a warrior and a girl with a ticker tape parade in her eyes. I love that line. I think those are really heartfelt things because it's about resilience, which is what our time is about right now, and finding our way back to hope. And that's where the Book of the Dead kind of comes in too, which is did you know, Josephine says, did you know that the Book of the Dead is also called the Book of Coming Forward into Light? And so, we are, we are the ancestors, of our future. So there's so much that we have to inform for, what comes next and setting the stage for what comes next.
So just one question I'm sorry. Ginny, you were going to say something.
Oh, I'll just to, there's when we were working on the end and those final lines, which, are so important, there was, as part of the workshopping process, it was, I just remember we were doing this exercise in what a conversation between them would be like. And it's not in the film, but Joe says, how did you see this ending? Like, what did you want to happen? And Bessie says, ticker tape parade for us. And so that was sort of the origin of Joe saying, you have a ticker tape parade in your eyes. So
that's great.
Yeah.
This may have already been answered, but looping back to the origin of the story, someone shared that there was a play, Radium Girls, that played at the Playwrights Theater in Madison, New Jersey in the 90s. And it looks like the author of the play was a granddaughter or a great-granddaughter of one of the Radium Girls. Were you aware of that play, or is that any connection, or was that a source that you used in researching?
Oh. No, I don't think so. We have had contact with one of the, with a granddaughter of one of the Radium Girls, but I don't think that, but I don't think she's a playwright. So this must be a different granddaughter. I will say that there's a play. I think there probably are 2 or 3 plays out there, but one that is very prominent was written by D.W. Gregory, who's a playwright. And we've also been in touch with her. But the amazing thing about D.W. Gregory's play is that it is considered in the top 10 of all high school plays produced in the US. And it's been that way for the last 3 years running. And it's been such a popular play with young girls across the country. I mean, when Ginny and when it kind of came out that we were making this movie, they all started writing to us and like, when can we see the movie? When can we see the movie? We're doing this play. And science teachers, theater teachers, people were just really reaching out because so many girls were fascinated by this story. And I think it speaks a bit to, the generation that's coming up that feels like they didn't break this world, but they have to fix it. And it's also an inspiring thing to see other, teenage girls really gravitate toward the story. But I think that the play has been performed. It's also been performed in colleges and I think in other community theaters. So so I think some people have come to know about the story that way. Ginny and I were just invited to a Zoom production that the Archer Girls School in LA had, and we were thrilled to attend virtually. And it was amazing. They did a great job because it's a girls' school. It was all girls playing all the parts, including the corporate villains, and that was terrific. A really well done production.
Yeah.
One other question here that I think requires some context, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with our theater in Ambler. The Ambler Theater was actually built for the Keasbey Matson asbestos factory workers. The town of Ambler is sort of a company town around the Keasbey Matson asbestos factory. So there's a lot of history in town with the asbestos there, and we actually have our own Superfund site and our own toxic chemicals to worry about. Just the question was wondering if any of the archival research you did or looking into these other environmental issues mentioned at any point, if you saw any mention of Keasbey Matson and Ambler or any stories related to the factory there.
I in the research, I didn't specifically read about the factory, but I did read a lot about the industrial toxicology of the Newark, New Jersey area and the sort of the surrounding areas in the 1920s, because it was, as one scientist put it, like the most important place for industrial toxicology in the 1920s in terms of the asbestos, the mercury, the benzene, the the tetraethyl, I'm saying it wrong, with the gasoline, the radium. And I do, one of the things that has stuck with me, and I think it probably is connected to this factory, is that the asbestos workers in the 1920s were not eligible for life insurance because there was an awareness that people working with asbestos had shorter life expectancies. And that has stuck with me because I think with so many of these industrial toxins, there is sometimes, as there was with radium, a narrative that, you know, we didn't know how dangerous it was. Like, oops. But, you know, with asbestos, you're having workers in the 1920s who are being denied life insurance. So, you know, they're, it's pretty devastating. So, but I'm sure there's a lot of research there to be found.
Oh.
And we just had someone share that they live in Princeton, but used to live in Ambler, and their grandfather worked at the Keysby Madison plant and got asbestos as a result of his work there. Very sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
But yes, as I think we were just talking, that, you know, there are so many resonances in this film, and I really love the way that you put it, Lydia. That if anyone takes anything away from this, really it's standing up and using your voice, and I think that comes through loud and clear. And it was a real joy and privilege to watch this and to learn this story, and to be given that charge. And I hope that unless anyone has any other questions, I sort of have one sort of question in closing. You mentioned that this is, you know, not the direction that you saw the film opening, and that you've been doing these, you know, virtual screenings here. But it sounds like that, you know, through Zoom and, you know, connections to seeing this play and some other things, there might have been some doors that have opened. Can you talk about the sort of what it's been like releasing this film in this digital world, and what the future of the film is?
Yeah, we, you know, when we opened, there were some physical theaters that were open and landmark cinemas across the country, in other states like Arizona, and even Chicago was opening their cinemas. I think pretty much right now, with the way everything is spiking up, everything is like closing now. But we've had a little bit of that in social distancing. We were really thrilled to have our New Jersey premiere at the Cranford Drive-In Theater, and that was really exciting. It was there were like 80 cars which had multiple people in them, and the projection was gorgeous. It was beautiful, and we auctioned off one, or we actually just raffled off one of the factory jackets, which was kind of fun and exciting. And, you know, so it's been like, we never would have imagined that that's, you know, the way we would be screening the movie. But, you know, we have partnered with a lot of different national groups, like the National Association of Science Teachers and the International Society of Women Engineers, and, you know, historical societies, and science museums, and, you know, just so many different, you know, the National Association of Women's Studies. And so it's been great to sort of really engage with audiences. And, you know, normally you would have to get in your car and drive somewhere, or get on a plane and fly somewhere to sort of talk and do a live Q&A. And we found ourselves, even with the Summit New Jersey Film Society, all of a sudden we were like this, and everybody was on a grid, and I felt like I was in everybody's living room at one time. And, you know, it's really, I have to say, as a filmmaker, it's special, because I think that connecting with the audience is really a special opportunity, because that's why we make movies. You know, we make movies for audiences to watch and experience, and we learn a lot from the process of hearing what people's questions are, what sparks for them, or what they take away from it. So I think that's been a really terrific piece of it. We are, you know, starting a social impact campaign for the rest of the theatrical window that goes through January, and then we'll be on Netflix in January. But before that, we really want to keep doing what we're doing and talking to everybody and connecting. And we're working with the Sierra Club on a campaign with their initiative around toxics and health. And anybody that wants to be a part of it or be involved or just follow along, you can see what we're doing on social media. We're on Instagram. We're at Radium Girls Movie. And we have a website, radiumgirlsmovie.com. So we'd love to stay in touch with people and have them join the community that we're in.
Thank you so much, Lydia and Ginny, for your time, and again for making this wonderful film and sharing it with us, and making it available so that we could share even in this time when our theaters are closed. I wish you the best with the rest of the run and the connections that you make, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Have a good night.
You too.
Good night, everybody.